Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 131. Chapter 131. The weather was already growing wintry, and morning frosts congealed on earth saturated by autumn rains. The verdure had thickened, and its bright green stood out sharply against the brownish strips of winter rye trodden down by the cattle, and against the pale yellow stubble of the spring buckwheat. The wooded ravines in the copses, which at the end of August had still been green islands amid black fields and stubble, had become golden and bright red islands amid the green winter rye. The hares had already half changed their summer coats. The fox cubs were beginning to scatter, and the young wolves were bigger than dogs. It was the best time of year for the chase. The hounds of that ardent young sportsman Rostov had not merely reached hard winter condition, but were so jaded that at a meeting of the huntsmen it was decided to give them a 3 days' rest, and then, on the 16th of September, to go on a distant expedition, starting from the oak grove where there was an undisturbed litter of wolf cubs. All that day the hounds remained at home. It was frosty, and the air was sharp, but toward evening the sky became overcast, and it began to thaw. On the 15th, when young Rostov, in his dressing gown, looked out of the window, he saw it was an unsurpassable morning for hunting. It was as if the sky were melting and sinking to the earth without any wind. The only motion in the air was that of the dripping, microscopic particles of drizzling mist. The bare twigs in the gardens were hung with transparent drops which fell on the freshly fallen leaves. The earth in the kitchen garden looked wet and black, and glistened like poppy seed, and at a short distance merged into the dull, moist veil of mist. Nicholas went out into the wet and muddy porch. There was a smell of decaying leaves and of a dog. Milka, a black-spotted, broad-haunched bitch with prominent black eyes, got up on seeing her master, stretched her hind legs, lay down like a hare, and then suddenly jumped up and licked him right on the nose and mustache. Another borzoi, a dog, catching sight of his master from the garden path, arched his back, and rushing headlong towards the porch with lifted tail, began rubbing himself against his legs. "Ahoy!" came at that moment, that inimitable huntsman call which unites the deepest bass and the shrillest tenor, and round the corner came Daniel, the head huntsman, and head kennelman, a gray, wrinkled old man, with hair cut straight over his forehead, Ukrainian fashion, a long bent whip in his hand, and that look of independence and scorn of everything that is only seen in huntsmen. He doffed his Circassian cap to his master, and looked at him scornfully. This scorn was not offensive to his master. Nicholas knew that this Daniel, disdainful of everybody, and who considered himself above them, was all the same his serf and huntsman. "Daniel," Nicholas said timidly, conscious at the sight of the weather, the hounds, and the huntsman that he was being carried away by the irresistible passion for sport which makes a man forget all his previous resolutions, as a lover forgets in the presence of his mistress. "What orders your excellency?" said the huntsman in his deep bass, deep as a protodeacon's and hoarse with hallowing. And two flashing black eyes gazed from under his brows at his master, who was silent. "Can you resist it?" those eyes seemed to be asking. "It's a good day, huh? For a hunt and a gallop, huh?" asked Nicholas, scratching Milka behind the ears. Daniel did not answer, but winked instead. "I sent Duvarka at dawn to listen." His bass boomed out after a minute's pause. He says she's moved them into the Otradonia enclosure. They were howling there. This meant that the she-wolf, about whom they both knew, had moved with her cubs to the Otradonia copse, a small place 1.5 miles from the house. "We ought to go, don't you think so?" said Nicholas. "Come to me with Uvarka." "As you please." "Then put off feeding them." "Yes, sir." 5 minutes later, Daniel and Uvarka were standing in Nicholas's big study. Though Daniel was not a big man, to see him in a room was like seeing a horse or a bear on the floor among the furniture and surroundings of human life. Daniel himself felt this, and as usual, stood just inside the door, trying to speak softly and not move, for fear of breaking something in the master's apartment. And he hastened to say all that was necessary, so as to get out from under that ceiling, out into the open, under the sky once more. Having finished his inquiries and extorted from Daniel an opinion that the hounds were fit, Daniel himself wished to go hunting, Nicholas ordered the horses to be saddled. But just as Daniel was about to go, Natasha came in with rapid steps, not having done up her hair or finished dressing, and with her old nurse's big shawl wrapped around her. Petya ran in at the same time. "You are going?" asked Natasha. "I knew you would. Sonia said you wouldn't go, but I knew that today is the sort of day when you couldn't help going." "Yes, we are going," replied Nicholas reluctantly. For today, as he intended to hunt seriously, he did not want to take Natasha and Petya. "We are going, but only wolf hunting. It would be dull for you." "You know it is my great pleasure," said Natasha. "It's not fair. You are going by yourself, are having the horses saddled, and said nothing to us about it." "No barrier bars a Russian's path. We'll go," shouted Petya. "But you can't. Mamma said you mustn't," said Nicholas to Natasha. "Yes, I'll go. I shall certainly go," said Natasha decisively. "Daniel, tell them to saddle for us, and Michael must come with my dogs," she added to the huntsman. It seemed to Daniel irksome and improper to be in a room at all, but to have anything to do with a young lady seemed to him impossible. He cast down his eyes and hurried out, as if it were none of his business, careful as he went not to inflict any accidental injury on the young lady. All right, that concludes my reading of chapter 131. I'll now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, Day 131. Season of Mists and Mellow Fruitfulness. As we've seen with Andrew's oak and Natasha's moon, Tolstoy is very adept at using nature as a powerful symbol of his character's inner life. What then are we to make of today's chapter? Nearly half of its words are spent on naturalistic depictions of the Rostov estate at Otradonia. What, if anything, do these passages tell us about Nicholas Rostov? On the surface, things don't look so cheerful. The morning frosts, after late autumn rains, have congealed upon the ground. The air is cold and sharp. The sky is overcast, as if it were melting and sinking to the earth without any wind. Drizzling mists drip on the bare twigs in the garden, and the earth below is wet and black and muddy among the scattered decaying leaves, like the most depressing Hemingway sentence you've ever read. Tolstoy isn't unique in his dour description of this season. Often autumn is presented, even with the abundance of its harvest, as a harbinger of winter, as death. Take John Keats's To Autumn, for example. In that poem's first stanza, the poet sings of the productive power of summer swelling the gourds and budding the flowers. It is healthy summer that does all the work for the harvest of autumn. Then, in the third stanza, he writes of the song of spring and the incipient life it brings. Notably absent from the poem, however, is any mention of winter. It's as if Keats, who would be dead less than 2 years after the writing of the poem, cannot bring himself to speak about the doom and lifelessness of that season. He can only hint at it in the poem's final stanza with its subtle suggestions of sadness and death. While barred clouds bloom in the soft dying day, and touch the stubble plains with rosy hue, then in a wilful choir the small gnats mourn among the river sallows, borne aloft or sinking as the light wind lives or dies. It'd be tempting to go along with this understanding of autumn as a harbinger of death in today's chapter. Nicholas is, after all, in lots of trouble. His family is in crisis, his beloved sister is set to be married and leave the home, depriving it of much-needed light. Further, they might not even have a home for her to leave if they can't solve their financial problems. The long winter of the Rostovs seems to be at hand. But maybe Tolstoy is up to something here. I apologize for the spoiler alert, but the following chapters detail a very joyful and rejuvenating hunt. I did not fully understand the importance of these chapters during my first reading of the novel. Truthfully, I remember merely skimming through them. But now, after many readings of the novel, I understand them, at least with respect to Nicholas Rostov, as some of the most important chapters in the entire book. These are chapters that really illustrate the power of mindfulness. Throughout these chapters, Rostov lives among the deteriorating weather of autumn and the coming of deathly winter, but he maintains throughout it all a steady, focused mind. We've already seen that he has taken steps, however falteringly, towards moving away from his angry, petulant youth towards a mature, balanced adulthood. By the time this portion of the novel is complete, he'll be well on his way there, equipped only with a change of mind. Daily meditation. The world in which a man lives shapes itself chiefly by the way in which he looks at it, and so it proves different to different men. To one it is barren, dull, and superficial. To another rich, interesting, and full of meaning. On hearing of the interesting events which have happened in the course of a man's experience, many people will wish that similar things had happened in their lives too, completely forgetting that they should be envious rather of the mental aptitude which lent those events the significance they possess when he describes them. To a man of genius, they were interesting adventures, but to the dull perceptions of an ordinary individual, they would have been stale, everyday occurrences. Author Schopenhauer, The Wisdom of Life. All right, that concludes my reading and reflection on chapter 131. I hope you liked it. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation to PayPal. The links to all that are below. Your support is greatly appreciated. Tomorrow we'll be reading and reflecting on chapter 132. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.